The wall is a wall of a bit of history based on our being plaintiffs in a federal lawsuit to overturn Proposition 8 here in California, along with our two female plaintiffs, Chris and Sandy. And so we memorialize that on this wall in a way to remind us of what's important and to stay active and stay informed and continue that education.
I didn't come out till I was 30, and it's one of my biggest regrets in life. It wasn't anything that was wrong with the family environment or the environment around me. It was just getting comfortable in my own skin. If I could go back to my younger self, I would say you should come out earlier. But things happen the way they do for a reason. I came out when I was 30, and we ultimately came out then very publicly a few years later with the lawsuit. But I've always been proud, and if I could go back right now and flip a switch and say you could be straight if you want, I wouldn't. I'm really proud of who I am and who we are as a couple, and really where we are right now in our LGBTQ movement. This guy right here inspired me to come out. We had been together for a couple of years, and I really wanted us to move in together, and he said that I could take as long as I want, but he was not going to move in with me until I was completely out, because he didn't want to deal with separate phone lines or anything like that. And that really inspired me. I went home that night from his apartment and booked a trip back to New Jersey and came out to my family and friends 2 months before my 30th birthday. And when I came home, I gave him a key for his birthday, and the key was to my condo.
Well, I had learned through being in the closet myself that it's really easy to let external pressures define who you are when you're gay or marginalized for being a part of a minority group. And so what I learned over time was that my pride shouldn't be affected by that I should be in control of my life. And so coming out for me was such a transformative experience. I knew what it meant to me, and I knew that having met Jeff's family and heard the stories, that it was really his narrative. It was about him coming out versus the response of his family coming out, of his coming out. So I wanted to make sure that before we started a new life together, that he was able to feel secure in himself and know that he had the support of his friends and family, and that regardless of how alone you might feel before you come out, once you do, you realize that you have a network that you possibly never knew you had, but it's been there and it will continue to be there, and that makes life so much better.
Somewhere on this wall behind me is a picture of my parents at one of our lawsuit events, and they became such advocates of us and our desire to get married, and have still become advocates of our movement and talking to their friends, because we always say that our movement is generational, but in a way that's true, in a way that's not true, because you're not born homophobic, you're not born transphobic, you are a product of your environment. So if you surround yourself with the right people and you educate people and inform people and help change hearts and minds with your stories, ultimately that's what's going to eradicate discrimination against our community.
It's reciprocal, right? You becoming more prideful gave them the opportunity to be proud of you and increase their pride.
It's true. Well said. I think that we get that question a lot, and I think what we've always said is, you're going through it as a couple, you're not going through it individually. So if he was going through some type of litigation without me, then there might be an issue where I would have to make sure I'm supporting, or there might be a disconnect in understanding. But because we were going through it together, and knowing that the ultimate goal would be then to solidify our life and our commitment to one another, that made going through it easier. It wasn't easy. It was 4.5 years. There was a lot of twists and turns. But at the end of the day, we could walk into this house and be with each other and empathize with each other and just ultimately love each other.
There were a lot of individual moments as well. I mean, we got deposed individually. We got trained for cross-examination individually. But there was a root there that brought us back together, and we would be able to compare notes.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't always agree on everything. We always weren't in the same emotional state at the same time, but we were available to each other to kind of understand that we were doing this as individuals, but also as a unit, and then also as a community. And so when you put all those things together and you kind of see the big picture, it helps you kind of create that path. And then, of course, at the end of it all, we hadn't had a true discussion about like getting married, and then here was the opportunity, and we had to ask each other, do you still want to get married after all of this? Because we had worked on it for so long, and you kind of, even though that's the end goal, you're so focused on the day-to-day work. And the cool thing was that we kind of realized that we had grown as individuals, but we had grown as a couple as well.
Yeah.
Wow, we're only here today because we were fortunate enough to have people that came before us that laid the path for us and literally laid their lives down on the line. Harvey Milk is a personal hero of mine. I've always said if there's someone living or who has passed that I could sit down and have a conversation with, it would be Harvey Milk, because I grew up in San Francisco. He was assassinated when I was 5 years old, and I have a burning memory of seeing the candlelight vigil walk down Market Street in San Francisco after he and Moscone were assassinated. And he prophetically knew that this was going to happen. I mean, he actually wrote it down and said, if a bullet should enter my brain, may it open every closet door. And it did. And I was, at 5 years old, even still affected by this, because this memory, I think, was serving my narrative, who I was to be. And to even be considered connected to that in any way is such a huge honor, because there are multiple Harvey Milks out there. He just happens to have this profile because of what he did and how he presented himself to the world. And we have to honor all of those people, because it is a coalition of efforts, right? It is this kind of like collective push, and it continues. We're not fully equal. We're not fully free. And so we take that, you do your part, and you just continue to pass the baton on and on and on. So without the past, we don't have a future. And right now in the present, we can double down and triple down and make sure that we make that better.
And many people told us, did you ever think that this, when we filed our lawsuit to when marriage became the law of the land in all 50 states, did you ever think it would happen so quickly? And I kept thinking, yeah, this may have happened quickly, but if you're Frank Kameny, or you're Bayard Rustin, or you're Cleve Jones, and you're these individuals that have carried this torch for so long through movements of trying to be recognized as a human, to the plague of the 80s and 90s with HIV, and obviously now with the marriage movement, there are so many people that came before us. And I think as a community and as a human, innately, I'm hopeful that people realize that our job is to leave the world a better place than we arrived. And for the next generation, they have marriage equality. They won't have to ever worry about being able to marry the person they love, but that doesn't mean the job is done. So our job is to continue to make things better, but to also pass the baton off to the next generation so that they understand that they have a responsibility to the LGBTQ movement as well. And I'm pretty confident that they're eager to take that baton. I think of what I would tell the younger me, and that's to stand up and be proud. You were made the way you were, and you're perfect the way you are. You have to resist. So if I were to encapsulate it into one word, I would say resist. But to add another word to that, I would say be proud.
Right. During our case, we made a promise to each other to say that we'll turn every negative into 100 positives. And we lived by that rule, and we wouldn't go down the road of trying to fight those that we knew were not going to understand or have a discussion, that all they wanted to do was debate and fight, and they weren't going to move on their position. But we realized that if we turned that around and educated by telling our stories, and reached across to people that were willing to hear the stories and really come face to face with an issue that they thought they knew something about but really didn't, and you find this surprise kind of connection to the person that is the most unexpected ally, that becomes an ally because they understand that it's easy to demonize an idea, but it's really hard to demonize a human being when you're sitting across a table from them. And so the idea here is, don't be belligerent, be vigilant, be educating, be true to yourself, go out there, tell your stories, be open, find your network, because it's very convenient to say, no one around me in my town or in my home is going to support me. But just across the street, you might find that person that helps create that kind of concentric circle. And before you know it, and we're seeing it now. I mean, the youth now is like, why should we even use labels? Why are we fighting this? I mean, equality is a backbone of our country. And I really believe that this next generation is going to be the generation that says, do away with discrimination, do away with prohibiting people from living their lives as equal citizens. Let's just live our lives.
Thank you.